Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight I have a guest on my channel. I'm speaking with Daniel Tyrie. So how's it going tonight, Daniel?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. So tonight we're going to be talking about a new organization founded in Canada, founded by Daniel himself. Before I get into the questions and everything, I'll just let Daniel introduce himself. So tell the audience a bit about yourself for anyone who hasn't heard of you.
Yeah, my name's Daniel Tyrie. I'm the founder and chairman of the Dominion Society, which is a new nationalist metapolitical organization, a sort of advocacy group for what we call heritage Canadians. So the descendants of the founding stock of this country. We are an advocacy group that focuses on one main idea, which is remigration. Canada's kind of suffered from decades of mass immigration, and we're advocating for real solutions to address the crisis that have been created by politicians from all major parties.
Excellent. So I guess before I get into the questions, because I'll ask Daniel a few questions. I mean, of course, I'm in agreement with this. I obviously am a supporter of remigration, and I imagine most of my audience is. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say that for me personally, I've been in the right wing scene for about the past 8 years now. I started my channel about 8 years ago, and during that time, there have been a lot of different Canadians in the scene. They've always been overrepresented, but there was never really a Canadian centric scene where you have figures who would be focused on Canada in particular. One good thing I've seen in the last couple of years is that we're now starting to see a Canadian scene developing. I've noticed this over the last 2 years. So you have people like Daniel or Greg Wycliffe, or people like Leigh Stewie who make nationalist news related to Canada. You have guys like Jeremy McKenzie or Fair Remains Toll who are now doing these podcasts and these fitness clubs. Someone like Fortisax who's doing this Canadian centric historic content and focused on Canadian politics and Canadian history. I think the one thing we were missing was kind of this organization, which could be a kind of a centralized hub for the entire sphere. And I think that something like the Dominion Society will probably be a good a good organization to kind of rally the new developing Canadian nationalist scene. So I'll get into a few questions and to ask about remigration. So of course I'll reiterate that I think everyone knows that I'm already in favor of this, but I'll ask these questions just to know like what Daniel's response would be to such said questions, and perhaps what your response could be if the questions come up in your personal life. So Daniel, how would you define remigration? So when someone asks what is remigration, what would you define it as?
So to me, remigration is the natural response to decades of unprecedented policies of mass immigration. The simple definition is it is the return of foreigners to their homelands through voluntary and non-voluntary measures.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would probably define it the same way. It's a return of migrants who have entered Canada and the broader Western world, but we're focused on Canada here in recent decades, which have caused these demographic shifts. So in effect, it's the reversal of the Great Replacement. So, what is the goal of remigration as defined by the Dominion Society?
Yeah, the goal of remigration is to primarily maintain the ethnocultural identity of Canada. Mass immigration has had a lot of negative consequences, both economically and culturally. And really, the only way to address these is by reversing the flow of mass immigration. You see a lot of politicians trying to deal with the kind of symptoms of the problems, whether that be crime or housing or healthcare or whatnot. We're looking to address these problems at the source while also defending and really defining the identity of what it means to be Canadian. Over the last, especially in the kind of post-Trudeau senior era, we've seen a redefinition of what it means to be Canadian in this kind of post-national multiculturalist sense. So we're really a rejection of that notion and a reasserting of what it means to be Canadian and really standing up for the kind of inherent value of the nation, which we view as a sort of extended family. So we want to both address the large scale kind of socioeconomic impacts of mass immigration, but also defend the kind of ethnocultural identity of what our society has been for the long history of Canada, which, you know, most people are focused on the recent history, the last 150 or so years since Confederation, but really the history of Canada goes far back, hundreds of years before Confederation.
Good. Yeah. So what I would say is that the goal of remigration would be to maintain the ethnic continuity of the founding European stock of Canada. So the goal ultimately is to ensure that we aren't demographically replaced, and that Canada remains a white supermajority country, and that ethnic Canadians, those whose ancestry is derived from the British Isles and France, that we continue to exist as a group and maintain first demographic control, but also political control of Canada as a country. And then that's the primary goal, but also it's important to bring up things like housing, the housing crisis, the job market, crime, and lack of social cohesion. These are all important points as well, but I think it's important to define the ethnic component first and foremost, that our goal primarily is ethnic continuity, but then from there, it's also these other issues like housing, like jobs, like crime, things like that. So who would be subject to remigration? So when we say we want remigration, who would we primarily be remigrating?
So we have a 3-phase 10-step plan that's all listed on our website. You can find it at dominionsociety.ca/remigration. We're primarily focused on we have a staged plan to focus on different groups, starting with people like illegals and criminals, who should be non-controversial and on the first on the block to be returned home. These fake asylum claimants, these fake students, all these people who really have no purpose of being in our country. But we also have plans to go even further. Things like terminating current kind of permanent residencies. These are people who are allowed to stay in the country indefinitely, but don't have full citizenship yet. So they don't have all the rights of a Canadian citizen like you or I. It's a bit easier to legally expunge these things and send these people back. And then we also advocate for ideas of revoking even naturalized citizenship from people that are working against Canada's national interest or not adhering to or assimilating into our identity, still actively representing their foreign cultures and foreign causes in our own country. So there's a large swath of people that we would want to identify and return home, starting with the people who have the least reason to be here: criminals, temporary workers, people on temporary visas, stuff like that.
Okay, so the way I'd break it down would be, obviously it would be the illegals. They'd be kicked out first because they have no right to be here even under existing Canadian law. I'd say that the next step would be to revoke things like the international mobility visas, revoke the vast majority of international student visas and these temporary foreign worker visas, and then pretty much, I guess my plan would be the same. Then you'd probably look at things like permanent residencies, and you'd have to. I think that the majority of those should be canceled as well, since these individuals aren't actually citizens.
Yeah. So step one is what we call shut the door and disincentivize settlement. So it would be a total moratorium on all incoming immigration, whether or not it's permanent or temporary. No more people coming in for at least 10 years. Then we would look to abolish the temporary foreign worker program and the international mobility program. These are the big temporary settlement programs. So we annul these and send those people back. We also want to restrict birthright citizenship. Right now, Canada has very liberal laws when it comes to birthright citizenship. Anyone who's born in this country, even if it's to an illegal, a tourist, anything like that, gets automatic citizenship. And then these can be used as kind of anchor babies to bring in family members. It's a program that's notably taken advantage of. We want to restrict that. So you have to have at least one parent with citizenship to pass that on to the child. And then we advocate for a slew of policies, which I kind of put under an umbrella of just making Canada less hospitable to immigrants or people that are here temporarily. Things like a tax on remittances, so any money leaving the country to go back to family members in foreign countries, abolishing access to any social services for anyone who's a non-citizen, banning foreign religious symbols in public works, much like they do already in Quebec, not putting up to asylum seekers who are being processed in hotels, putting them up in much less favorable and cheaper conditions while they're processed, or quickly processing them and removing them from the country entirely. Right now, the state does so much to make it comfortable for people who are coming here, even people who are coming here illegally. And those are things that we just need to stop doing. Like we need to put our own people first, not making Canada a comfortable, safe place for people to come. It's just not the priority, in my opinion. So that's kind of phase one. And I think that'll knock off a massive part of the problem. But then we'd move on to phase two and phase three, which is more addressing things like permanent residence, opening something like a voluntary repatriation program, offering things like free plane tickets or even economic incentives for people to return to their country in exchange for losing their naturalized citizenship. But then also making new laws to strip people of citizenship. It's not completely unheard of. Right now, you can lose your citizenship if you're found to have engaged in fraud. Before Justin Trudeau, there was rules to have citizenship revoked if you engaged in terrorist activity. We want to expand those provisions to include things like publicly stating allegiances to other foreign countries, participating in foreign aligned political agitation, things that go against our national interest and unity.
Yeah, so I think that definitely the first thing to address would be like all the pull factors, so reasons that huge numbers of migrants enter Canada. I mean, the law would have to be changed about who's even allowed to enter the country, but you'd have to reverse all of the things which actually attract them here, meaning that a lot of them probably would just voluntarily remigrate. And then with the ones that weren't citizens would be much easier. I do think that it's also important to say that like what you said with people who have sworn allegiances to foreign countries, I think maybe possibly also people who have espoused anti-white political views or have engaged in some kind of subversive or seditious activity. I think it's legitimate to say that said person probably should have their citizenship revoked. So like there was a law you mentioned that someone who had engaged in terrorist activity would, at least I think that maybe Justin Trudeau might have changed that, but they could have their Canadian citizenship revoked. I would also extend that to like someone, for example, who engaged in Canadian politics on behalf of a country like China or India, or someone who had very clearly shown a conflict of interest. So someone like Jagmeet Singh, for example, or that former defense minister of Canada, people who have quite openly supported foreign groups and basically used Canadian politics to advance their own ethnic interests at the expense of the ethnic Canadians. I think that it would be legitimate that the people who have engaged in things like this, their citizenship should be reviewed, and then in many cases, I think they probably should be removed from the country because they're obviously not acting within the country's national interests, and it's deleterious to to Canada as a country for ethnic Canadians.
Yeah, exactly. We want to kind of change the overall philosophy of our government, which is very like liberal and internationalist, as has been the trend in the kind of post-war period. We want to reorient this and really to a more nationalist vision and start putting our own people first. Like, it really makes no sense to just allow these people to come live in our country and continue on advocating for foreign causes. The Khalistan movement is such like a great example. Like, we have more Sikh parliamentarians here in Canada than they do in India. They have an incredibly organized movement here, very focused. We see these public demonstrations and referendums going on in our streets about the establishment of a foreign ethno-state for Sikhs. Like, what does this have anything to do with Canada? Why do we allow these people to come here and live here and take advantage of our opportunity and our social services and transform our society into something that it looks completely different? We really should be putting our own people first and have no tolerance for this kind of behavior. So we want to see the federal government modify the laws in order to completely discourage and remove people from our country that engage in this behavior.
So I think that something like revoking the international mobility program, the temporary foreign workers program, revoking the vast majority of these student visas, which are totally illegitimate and basically just a scam to get into Canada by largely people from India. But that could be done quite quickly. I think, though, in terms of remigrating people who either are naturalized or maybe they even have citizenship, perhaps they're even born in Canada, I think that it's important to stress that that could be done over an extended period of time. Because a lot of critics of remigration, what they envision is that we're going to like have the police going around and rounding people up and then like stuffing them on airplanes and on ships. I mean, I do think that stuff like that should be done with illegals. I mean, because they have zero right to be in Canada. But I think that it's important to stress that something like a program to encourage remigration, I think that could be done over an extended period of time, perhaps over the course of a decade or two. And that it wouldn't have to be something which was just carried out within one day or within a very short period of time, as critics would envision. Because the goal is ultimately to restore the ethnic balance of the country and to reverse the trend. But just like how this trend took quite a few years to materialize, that the demographic shifts took place over time. I think it's also important to stress that the reversal it will take time, but the goal ultimately is to start that trend in that direction, and that should be something which would calm the nerves of perhaps people who would claim that we're going to be going around with the police like breaking down people's doors and things like that.
Yeah. People get pretty extremist visions, especially our critics who intentionally want to misrepresent us. The timeline that you've suggested, I think, is very reasonable. We have this 10-step plan. I think it could reasonably be implemented over the course of roughly a decade. And again, we want to prioritize these people that have absolutely no place being in our country. I think that kind of phase one could be done within a single government mandate within a 4-year period of just imposing this moratorium, removing all these kind of pull factors, as you put it, to bring people into the country, passing laws to restrict birthright citizenship. Like, all this can be done very, very quickly by a sitting government with a majority mandate, abolishing the temporary foreign workers program. Like that, this could be done immediately. It would just when it becomes to expanding our CBSA or establishing a new government department and actually working on deporting people, this is the kind of thing that's going to take years. But like official government estimates suggest that there's somewhere between 20,000 and 500,000 illegals in our country. There's 4.9 million people on temporary visas expiring throughout 2025. And the government explicitly has no plan to ensure these people are leaving. Now, there are kind of automatic factors, like their temporary social insurance numbers will expire and they won't be legally allowed to work. But we know a large percentage of these people stay and work in the kind of black market. And this has a huge depressing influence on Canadian wages and increases unemployment of actual Canadians. So we need to, like, it's completely unreasonable to not have the resources necessary to actually ensure these people are leaving. So this kind of phase one, even moving into phase two, to start pushing towards the deportation of illegals and temporary workers and such, I think is very realistic to clamp down in within a single term. But like the most important thing I think is really reorienting the kind of basic philosophy of our government. As I already said, there's just this very liberal, this very internationalist perspective that we have to protect and defend the rights of anyone from anywhere. That anyone has the right to come and become a Canadian. And I think this is really the kind of root problem, because it's just not true. Not like a Canadian is more than just someone from India that hasn't gotten here yet. And we shouldn't be structuring policy to benefit people and to bring them into the country. We should be structuring policy to promote the welfare of our own people. I think this is a very obvious common sense thing that the vast majority of Canadians will agree with, and yet we've seen our government kind of slip away to this really, really bizarre globalist, internationalist sort of philosophy. So really, we want to reorient the government, and we want to do that through kind of populist activism by organizing people, because I really do believe that the large majority of Canadians agree with us, but the reality is they're very disorganized. There's no centralized group to get everyone on side singing from the same song sheet, agreeing on the same ideas, and as a result, we're very easy to take advantage of and take for granted. Whereas if you look at every other foreign ethnic group in Canada, they're all organized around community groups, faith groups, not-for-profit or even charitable organizations, things like the National Council for Canadian Muslims or the World Sikh Organization. And as a result, we know the politicians just want the path of least resistance, right? They want the way to gain support. And you see them pandering to these groups all the time, whether it be going to their temples and taking off their shoes and putting on their headdresses and playing dress up and doing whatever they can to pander to these folks, or going to their protests and making promises like to stop the deportation of these fake students, like we saw Pierre Poilievre do a year or two ago. These people are organized, and as a result, the politicians go up to them and say whatever they will, whatever they can to beg for their support. We're taking those exact same strategies, and we're going to use them in support of actual Canadian people, and make it very difficult to ignore our ideas and take us for granted anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest issue is that ethnic Canadians aren't a political bloc. Therefore, even though we're the majority of the country, I mean, that's not going to be the case for very long if things continue. But you'll see someone like even Pierre Poilievre, who's supposed to be, a conservative, supposed to be a right winger. You'll see that he spends infinitely more time pandering to Sikhs, who make up 2 or 3% of the population of Canada, than to ethnic Canadians. Well, I mean, it's infinitely more because he spends zero time pandering to us. And that's because they actually are an organized political bloc who are pushing for their own interests, whereas we simply don't have that. And that is the fundamental issue. And I think that establishing that is how we're going to get politics to really go in Canada, to really go in our direction. So I wanted to ask, how would you define a ethnic Canadian?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, it's most people view Canada as a very young country. We have about 160 years of history back to 1867 when the country was founded. But that's just not an accurate view of Canadian history, right? Our people have been on this continent since about the 1600s, when they started to settle the St. Lawrence Valley. So an ethnic Canadian to me is, or we like to use the term heritage Canadians. Ethnic Canadians gets people confused. I find sure. They think of ethnic people in Canada with citizenship.
Heritage Canadians.
Yeah. So I view these as the descendants of the explorers, settlers, and builders that came here primarily from Scotland, England, France, and Ireland, but also some subsequent waves of further Europeans who came here and settled this country from coast to coast. In that case, that started in the 1600s and went through to even post Confederation, when we were still settling Western Canada. If we're being very specific and genealogically focused, really the ethnic Canadians are the people who came from that settled the St. Lawrence Valley, primarily from those four countries, and over hundreds of years, from the 1600s to the 1800s, underwent an ethnogenesis to form two unique ethnic groups, and that's the French Canadians and the Anglo Canadians. These people then primarily spread across the country. The settling of the West was mostly done by people from Eastern Canada moving out west, but also people from the U.S. of the same ethnic stock, and more people from the British Isles who all, quickly assimilated and intermarried and kind of merged into that ethnos, and some other groups from Eastern Europe and Northern Europe as well, but all kind of merging around that central foundation of the Canadian, which is a unique ethnicity that established themselves in the St. Lawrence Valley. So these are the Canadians. This is what we mean when we say a Canadian. We're not talking about some liberal notion of values or pieces of paper, citizenship, passports. We're talking about a people with a shared history that goes back hundreds of years.
And what's useful for us is that we have the symbol of the red ensign flag and the Canadian shield, because it's just spelled out for you right there that the emblem has the shield has the emblems of Scotland, Ireland, England, and France, and that spells it out for you right there, that it's saying that this emblem represents is the European ancestry of the settlers who built Canada. Would you define French Canadians and Anglo Canadians as both as Canadian ethnic groups, but perhaps two separate Canadian ethnic groups?
I think it's reasonable to put them as two separate ethnic groups, but really they do have an incredible amount of overlap. There was a significant Anglo population in Quebec that, or what became Quebec, that did intermarry with the French population over hundreds of years, which creates a significant kind of ethnic overlap between the two groups. Now, obviously, I think it's reasonable to construe them as a different ethnic group. They do have their own kind of more specialized history, a different language. While there is overlap, there is still distinction between the two groups. So I do think it's reasonable to construe Canada as two nations, but I think we share an incredible amount in common. I think one of the beautiful things about Canada and our history is this kind of compromise between the two identities. So while we are slightly separate, we are so intermingled that for the most part, I think it's an arbitrary distinction and mostly unhelpful at this stage in our history when we have bigger threats, bigger things to deal with. It's time for us to put our differences aside and celebrate what unites us and work together to solve the greater problems in our country. We can go back to squabbling between Anglos and Francos once we deal with the mass immigration problem. I long to go back to those squabbles between us.
Yeah, it would be nice if that were the biggest problem we were facing, but clearly at this point of Canadian history, that's the last thing we need. And to be honest, even though I'm an Anglo Canadian, as you all know, I feel like I have a lot more in common with French Canadians than I do with any of the migrants entering the country. I also wanted
I have French Canadian roots, actually. Like I have some English and Scottish roots. My last name is Scottish, but most consistently, like my mom's side is completely French Canadian, going back to the 1600s. So while I was raised in English Canada, while my French is very poor, I speak very limited French. I am very proud of Canada's French history, and I do think I think it's a crucial part of Canada's identity. This balancing act of English and French. It's something that I'm very proud of, even though it's been a strain of a big challenge for our country for all of our history.
Yeah, I guess I can clarify too that I actually do have some French Canadian ancestry myself as well. I think that I haven't done the ancestry test. I would probably get about 80-90% Scottish, probably about 80% Scottish, maybe like 90% British Isles, but I probably would have at least 10% French Canadian in me as well, maybe even more. I know one of my grandmothers was she was French Canadian, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is that I think that French Canadians and Anglo Canadians are inextricably linked, and when we say heritage Canadian in this context, we can be thought of as one group in effect, even though technically it would be two different groups. In effect, in a political sense, it would be one in this context. Now, this is not entirely related to remigration, but I think it's important to address because it's a question which will definitely come up whenever the issue of remigration is brought up, and it's the indigenous question. So I don't think any Canadian nationalist, I've never met one who thinks that the indigenous people of Canada don't have a place in our country. They obviously are part of the country as well, and they are part of the entire. They're part of the entire history of Canada as it has existed as a European entity and further back. So, what would you say about the indigenous question? And if you're challenged on the question of remigration, so as you all know, as you can imagine, what a critic will say is that heritage Canadians, well, we were also immigrants here, and that we aren't the indigenous people of Canada. And how can we make a claim that Canada is ours when we weren't the first ones here? And perhaps they might even say that they might even accuse us of having stolen Canada. So what would your response to that be?
I think it's a very foolish line of questioning. Like Canada did not exist until European settlers came here. And I think it's an important thing to draw a distinction between immigrants and settlers. While maybe sociologists would say it is a trend of immigration, like there's obviously something dramatically different from between someone who comes to a wilderness across hostile waters to carve civilization out of literal wilderness, compared to economic immigrants who come here to take advantage of our wealth and opportunity, who did not sacrifice and bleed for these lands to just come here for a job and a paycheck. It's like there's something obviously so fundamentally different between these two things. But also, we didn't steal Canada from the indigenous. There was, when Europeans arrived here, there was just a bunch of warring tribes with no kind of with very few permanent settlements laid down, and certainly, stuck in the Iron Age, very far behind us. We Canadians are the ones that built a civilization that did include the indigenous First Nations, whatever you want to call them, groups. Now, I do think that they are a crucial part of Canada, and while it is Europeans that built this settlement, that built this country from nothing, they would have never been successful without the support and agreements that they made with the indigenous communities that were already here. So I do think that we have a sort of responsibility, a duty to create a more effective relationship with these people. It has been a struggle of Canadian society for forever, pre-Confederation and even today. Like there's most reserves in this country are in third world conditions with every metric is horrific, whether it's suicide rates or alcoholism or fetal survival rates. Like literally all metrics are almost third world conditions or just as bad. It's very clear that despite the crocodile tears and big talk around reconciliation and all these things, that we still have a very dysfunctional relationship with these people. But the reality is, like, Canada wouldn't exist, or would or Europeans only were able to find a foothold in Canada through developing relationships and learning how to survive on this continent from the indigenous people that were already here. So I do think, while arguments that we're on stolen land, or that the only legitimate Canadians are the indigenous, is obviously false. Again, Canada did not exist before the Europeans arrived as an entity. There still does need to be more when it comes to developing a more thriving relationship with these people. That being said, I do think we can form fruitful alliances with them. I think that our message of remigration is something that they can relate with as much as, heritage Canadians, ethnic Canadians. They like, I don't think they want to lose this country to further waves of immigrants from anywhere and everywhere. I think that we can form an alliance, just like Anglo and French Canadians can set aside what differentiates us while we fight towards this common goal. I think we can form similar alliances with indigenous groups to achieve this greater mission. But there's definitely greater problems to solve once we take back this country.
Yeah, the way that I would address the indigenous question is that I consider them to be part of Canadian society, and they've played a vital role in the country's history. Though, of course, I do agree that Canada didn't exist as an entity until it was developed by European settlers, and that we have to distinguish between settlers and immigrants. A settler is somebody who builds a country from the ground up. Immigrant is someone who arrives in a place which is already established, as you mentioned. What I'd say is that, I mean, for me, I certainly have no feelings of guilt or intentions to apologize over the past, because I feel like even whenever Europeans and the First Nations came into conflict, well, I mean, that was just the historical process playing out, because as we all know, Europeans were in conflict with each other on Canadian soil, and Indigenous tribes were in conflict with each other, and that's kind of just how it goes. So I'm not going to apologize over anything that's gone on in our history. I mean, I would also say that I do feel like that I don't want to lay this at the feet of all of them, but the activist type, which is being fermented by the political establishment now, that really does have to go. So this idea of basically the pushing of the anti-white narrative, like this ridiculous narrative about residential schools and then like this ridiculous mass graves hoax, all that has to end. Now, I will say that I don't have the same sympathy in this masochistic way that leftists do with the indigenous, but I certainly do have sympathy with them. I mean, I think that they belong in Canada, just like the settlers do. However, my message would be, and I don't know if any Indigenous Canadians actually follow me, but if, let's say, theoretically I were one of them did, or if I were in a conversation, what I would say is that heritage Canadians actually do have sympathy with them, which third world migrants do not. So let's say that the trends continue, that Canada is becoming increasingly Indian and increasingly Chinese. Well, I mean, just look at how Indians treat each other in India. Look how someone like the Uyghurs are treated in China. These people aren't going to be hampered by the same guilt that, which in my opinion goes too far, but they wouldn't be hampered by that same kind of sympathy that in the current under the current context, white Canadians are. And these groups certainly have no intentions long term to actually respect the rights which Indigenous Canadians have been afforded throughout Canadian history. And I think that if you think long term, because I know that the current political establishment has very effectively incorporated them into this kind of multicultural anti-white alliance, and use that very effectively. But I think long term, my message to them would be that you have to think about who's actually going to have sympathy with you. Now, I don't have sympathy to the extent where I'm going to like apologize for our history or I'll flog myself with white guilt or anything and just say yes to absolutely any request. However, the people that are being brought in to replace us, they won't have any sympathy at all. They would have no qualms about just absolutely about paving over reserves and building giant apartment blocks for whoever they bring in from China or India or wherever that is. That long term, I think that that the indigenous would have just as much to lose as we would. Would you have any response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the importance of maintaining this kind of historical continuity within our country. Like, if we're going to, have any sort of accountability and build towards better solutions, I think that's important. Again, I completely agree. The narrative around residential schools and the issues with the indigenous have been hijacked and transformed into these dishonest anti-white narratives. But like as I mentioned, the situation on reserves is literally third world. Like there's certainly we can certainly do better without lying about the past and importing millions of people per year that have no interest in our historic context, that bring their own foreign religions and foreign priorities and foreign causes into this will not solve these issues. It just creates a weird mishmash of new problems. So I do think we need to put our foot down, say what is and what isn't a Canadian, and then start acting more in the interests of Canadians, including our indigenous communities.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that you mentioned that the conditions on the reserves are quite bad. I mean, I would also acknowledge that a lot of that might have something to do with the fact that you look at history, that they weren't able to develop a modern society like Europe was either. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that I would want the conditions to be bad, but at the same time, you also have to kind of be a bit realistic. It's much like what the issue they have with the blacks in the United States. They often say like, well, it's because of socioeconomic factors or whatever have you, but ultimately it does have a lot to do with just the genetic disposition of certain groups. But anyway, that's beside the point though. Here, I wanted to also ask, why is remigration a morally justifiable goal in your opinion?
Well, I believe that a nation has inherent value. That there's something profoundly important and beautiful about the nation, just like there is the same sort of value and connection around the family. To me, that the nation is the next building block upon that. And in the last, really since the 1980s, but much more rapidly in the 10 years under Justin Trudeau, we've seen the mass replacement of these people, and we're quickly seeing our country transform into something completely different. I think the obvious kind of canary in the coal mine is Brampton. In pretty much just in the last 30 years in my lifetime, we've seen Brampton transform from a majority heritage Canadian city to a majority Southeast Asian city, and if you go there, it's like visiting a foreign country. Like there's everything's done people are speaking foreign languages. There are all the signs are in different languages. There are these giant statues of foreign gods. And to me, this is something very bizarre and kind of fundamentally wrong. The people who our ancestors, the settlers who came and risked their lives, risked everything to build this country, didn't do it just to make a effective economy that anyone from anywhere could integrate into and receive wealth. No, they risked everything for a better life for their families and for their descendants. And right now, that's being squandered by short-sighted policies or even worse, like actually like seditious or subversive policies from those that are in control. Like I I think most people will agree with me that there is something like on a deep gut level that is important about the nation. But more and more that this concept isn't even understood. Like it's nations used as a synonym for country or state or these things when there's actually a distinction. Like it is inherently not just a landmass. Like it is a people. And I think that's something beautiful and worth protecting.
What I would say is that uh, Canada is the only home with which ethnic Canadians are ever going to have. Of course, we have ancestral homelands in Europe, but you're not going to have hundreds of million or tens of millions of Canadians being able to flee back to Europe. And the problem is that the same thing's happening in those countries in Europe, which is happening in Canada. So what the current trends are going to bring about is that we're not going to have a home anywhere on Earth, and that, well, ultimately our ethnic group would actually just disappear. We were the ones who built Canada, and I think that it's morally just to say that we should have the right to maintain demographic control over it and have the country serve our interests. Because other groups, I'm not saying that every single one of them has to be like thrown on an airplane tomorrow and shipped off and stuff. We discussed the kind of the program that would bring that about in a peaceful and legal manner. But those other groups have homelands of their own, which act in their own interests. We won't have one anymore. We don't have one that acts in our interest, and we won't really have a place to call ours at all if the current trends continue. And furthermore, for people who would consider such an agenda amoral, I also would stress that we actually have a plan, which we've been discussing, to do this peacefully and legally in a way which would accommodate those who we remigrate. There exists no such plan for us. People from China, India, wherever it may be, who are Muslims and such, they don't have a plan for thinking, well, how are we going to advance our interests in Canada but then keep the country a place which is a good place to live for the heritage Canadians? There is no such plan that exists for us, and they have zero intentions of doing so. So when we say that we would like to maintain Canada as our own homeland and to have it serve our own interests, I think that that's a lot more morally justifiable than the idea that it should just be taken over by foreign groups who have homelands of their own and really have no interest in actually in accommodating us, and that ultimately it's just morally just that we actually have our own ethnic homeland, and I don't think that there's anything wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I would like to add that I think the philosophy that we're advocating for is very consistent with the historical identity of Canada. The country was really founded as a rejection of the spread of liberalism, specifically across the United States and in France through the French Revolution. Canada forming into a state was really a reaction to that and a rejection of that. And since the post-war period, we've seen with the kind of the Americans kind of taking over as the global military and cultural hegemon, we've seen the spread of kind of Americanism and liberalism across the world, but most intimately in Canada because of our intimate relationship because of the geography, creating this tight kind of economic ties. But if we're being honest, this switch towards American liberalism is really against the kind of nature of the Canadian. Literally, the most significant part of Canada's English founding stock were the Loyalists, the people who fought with Britain against the United States during the Revolutionary War and subsequently moved north to establish what would become British North America and then Canada. These people were fundamentally very distrusting of this new style of politics. And I think you still see this kind of anti-American instinct in the average Canadian. Like, I think we very much saw an example of that during this last election earlier this year, where the threats of Trump and talks of annexation kind of triggered something deep within Canadians, this instinctual anti-American sentiment, which was leveraged by the Carney Liberals to create a huge election upset, while the CPC kind of failed to tailor their message to that basic kind of nature of the Canadians. And I think that we can take advantage of that same instinct to revive this sort of more nationalist, more communitarian philosophy within our people, which does see the greater good of our society, of our nation, as a priority over the well-being of the individual. This is quickly summarized in the kind of thesis of each of our constitutions. You have the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of the Americans versus the peace, order, and good governance of Canadians. Like, we have this attitude where the social good comes before the individual, and I think we've seen a lot of people on the right are apprehensive about this because it's been systematically wielded against us in recent history. Things like censorship laws, things like crackdowns on gun rights, even the COVID years. All of these, they consistently use this kind of proclivity to prioritize communitarianism, to push these kind of left-wing agendas. But I think we can kind of take that back, and it's why, as we continue to put forward this kind of nationalist messaging and nationalist framing on how we approach issues, I think it's going to catch on like wildfire, because it's congruent with our identity as Canadians.
Yeah, that is a good point. That despite the recent reputation of Canada as this crazy libtard basket case of a country, and there is actually something within the Canadian psyche which would make our message quite appealing, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to take advantage of that. So let's shift over to the organization, the Dominion Society. So you introduced it briefly at the start, that it's an organization with the goal of remigration. So Daniel, can you tell me a bit about the structure of this organization and how it intends to achieve its goals?
Yeah. So we just launched the Dominion Society earlier this summer, July 21, I believe. So we're just we're going on 2 months. So we're definitely in our early days. Right now, it's operated by the founding board, which is myself and the two other founding directors, Ken Jones and Greg Wycliffe. And we're working on onboarding our members from across the country and building out a national organization and a national volunteer infrastructure. We have about 1,200 members now across the country, representing every single province and territory, except none of it, I think. And we're working on bringing on people across the country to become more intimately involved as volunteers. It's our intention to first build out kind of provincial networks, and then kind of work our way down to a more and more granular level. We have like a multifaceted approach to how we intend to extend our influence. And a big part of it, especially as we get things off the ground, has been social media. On a daily basis, we spread our message across all the mainstream social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, to kind of spread our message of remigration, our policy ideas, and our kind of nostalgic nationalist messaging, to kind of put more of this professionalized content out into the ecosystem to find more of our supporters and bring them into the organization, but also to influence the way people think about things. Then, as I mentioned, we have our detailed remigration plan. So this is our kind of more of our top-down approach. As our ideas get more traction, become more popular, and as we become more inevitable, and politicians are looking to, or even governments are looking to see how they can start adopting ideas of remigration, we have a detailed plan ready for them. Right now, we just have them as kind of policy summaries on our website. I intend to break these out into detailed white papers on each of the topics so that we can provide these directly to governments or politicians, so they have an easier time adapting our ideas for the real world. Ultimately, we're focused on organizing metapolitically, so becoming a more organized voting bloc and influencing culture to have downstream kind of impacts on governments and political parties as our ideas become more popular. As we develop our kind of grassroots infrastructure, we want to engage in more grassroots activism. So, putting up posters, putting flyers in mailboxes, organizing banner drops and protests and all that stuff to start spreading our message, not only through social media, but through the real world, through the meat space, as I call it.
Okay, so I for one have already signed up to become a member of the Dominion Society, and I've made a monetary donation to the group. So I very much endorse the message of the Dominion Society, and I encourage my fellow Canadians to do the same. What would you say to someone who was maybe considering joining the organization or perhaps giving a donation? What would be some of the projects which you might envision in the future, and where would this funding go?
Yeah, we get a lot of people, attacking us for charging for memberships and stuff like this. But the reality is, everything, politics, engaging in any sort of activism just costs money. I think one of our driving kind of philosophies is we want to put a professional face on this movement. For a long time, nationalists have been kind of smeared or even kind of generally pictured as kind of low IQ or racist or generally unesthetic. I want to put forward an organization that has a professional aesthetic that people can see themselves being a part of and would be proud to be represented by. So that's why we have a very carefully designed website. We have a very carefully designed policy platform. Everything that we do is informed by our history. I'm very careful about how I represent myself and our organization to the public. So the money that we bring in goes towards supporting that. We're going to be printing professional materials. We be it flyers or posters, banners, everything like that. We want it to be top of the line because we know aesthetics matter. We don't want to just cut corners and do things as cheap as possible. We want to be out there looking good so that more and more Canadians can see that and realize that we're a serious organization with credible ideas, and that they not only do they agree with us, but they can see us being as something they want to be a part of. So everything like that, everything takes money, and one of the big problems one of the big challenges of Canadian politics is just it's difficult to do basic politics in this country due to the sparse population density and the massive landmass. All these European countries are much smaller, so it allows for them to do these mass demonstrations. Everyone can easily descend on the capital. It's just a few hour drive or train ride for them. But this isn't possible in Canada. It's probably why the Freedom Convoy was so iconic. But just traveling around or sending materials across the country, everything we do is expensive. If I wanted to go to meet with our volunteers in Western Canada, travel is expensive. Every little thing takes money. So we do ask our most ardent supporters to pay a membership fee. It's $25 a year. This helps us support all of our efforts, and all of our donations kind of go into fueling that as well. Right now, it's a completely volunteer project. I work on this full time, but all of our board members are spending all their time in a volunteer capacity. But I do intend to build a professional staff that can work towards advancing our interests on a full-time basis. And some people are reflexively against this. They try and frame it as grifting and stuff like this. But the reality is all of our opponents already have this. There are so many metapolitical organizations on the left, charities with staffs of 10, 20, 30, hundreds of people that are out there pushing forward their message and being a kind of breeding ground for activists, for political parties and stuff. So many people that work for other parties during election time are just they're taking time off from their jobs at NGOs and charities to get involved in the political process, bringing their skills as professional activists to this space. And it's time we build this kind of resistance on our side of things. And really what's necessary is a sort of NGO, a sort of metapolitical organization that we can use to train our own people with the skills necessary. And we need to build a real organization that can work around the clock to both train our people, bring them to the next level, but also to advance our worldview, both in the public sphere and directly pressuring politicians.
Yeah, so I want to just echo that funding is extremely important. So anyone who's saying it's grifting, well, I mean, what I'd say to them is, do you actually want these ideas to actually ever have any influence? And if you do, then it needs funding, because you just look at how much funding's behind the left. The left didn't get where they got based on how good their arguments were. They got where they were because they had all the funding in the world. Now, of course, we can't outfund them, but since our ideas, I think, are much closer to the truth and closer to the natural order, I think that just a much smaller organization would punch much above its weight, because I think it costs a lot more money to sell someone a lie than it does to sell them the truth. However, it still does cost money, and you do need to have organizations. They need to have funding. So the other thing you mentioned was that
punching above our weight is also a very important part of Canadian identity. So I'm very happy to do that. But also, just given the context of the last week, I think a great example is the Turning Point organization. I don't agree with them philosophically, but I think they're a good example of a sort of metapolitical kind of. They're not. They're very much aligned with the American GOP, but they're not actually a part of them. But they've been able to establish a volunteer organization across the country and use that to advance their worldview by having a set of activists and volunteers across the country. And then we see those people who are loyal to the Turning Point philosophy then get to spin off and get opportunities in political parties or as politicians and so on. And through this, they create an actual influence, right? We want to do the exact same thing, but we want to act as that kind of breeding ground for the next generation of nationalists and give them those political opportunities, learn how to, knock on doors and distribute literature and create social media content and do all these little things that amount to political activism in 2025. And then who knows where they go? Maybe they go off into the business world and become, part of our economic elite. Maybe they go off into political parties and they also volunteer for the Liberals or the Conservatives and stuff and become the top guys in those parties as well. Maybe they start to run as candidates for these parties. And as a result, we shift the entire conversation back to nationalism. But we need to have that centralized organization to get everyone on the same page under the banner of Canadian nationalism and remigration. And to do that, it does take money. So if you're interested in our message, please do go to our website, become a member, especially if you're looking to be involved in some capacity, or make a donation if you just want to see us grow faster.
So you mentioned that the approach is a metapolitical one, and if anyone's wondering what that means, it means that it's not a political party per se, which is going to stand in elections. Rather, it's a metapolitical group, which is designed to push a specific message into the political sphere and to influence perhaps the entire political spectrum. Now, certainly the right half, and then hopefully later just the whole political spectrum altogether. Why do you think that a metapolitical approach is much better than a traditional parliamentary politics approach? Like let's say in contrast to something like the PPC, the People's Party of Canada.
That's a great question. And to my background is in the PPC. I don't know if you know this, but I was the executive director of the PPC for
I didn't
5
know
years.
that.
So I cut my teeth working in politics for the People's Party of Canada. I was hired by them in February 2019. I was a volunteer for them before that, and then after the 2019 election, I took over as the executive director, a position I held until May of 2024, when we parted ways over kind of disagreements on the messaging and direction of the party. So this is kind of my the Dominion Society is very much informed by my experiences and the shortcomings of the People's Party of Canada. So I wouldn't say that like I haven't put the idea of becoming a political party sometime in the future completely out of the question. I think if politicians are not taking our message seriously, or if they're just playing lip service to our ideas without actually implementing them, perhaps the only path forward is to become a political party and implement the ideas ourselves. But I think one of the issues with the PPC was it is very difficult to get a national party off the ground in Canadian politics. Those logistical issues that I referenced when we were talking about money just earlier, the population density makes political organization very difficult, and that's why we've seen very few national political parties actually start up and succeeding in Canada. If you look at any upstart political party, they've been regional in nature, right? You have the Social Credit Party in both Western and in Quebec, the Creditistes. You have the Reform Party. You have the Bloc. You have the CCF, the precursor of the NDP. All of these started as regionalist movements. None of them were national in nature off the bat. Some of them grew into national movements, but often they failed when they tried to do that. Like the Reform Party, they tried to push into Ontario, into Eastern Canada, and ultimately, rebranded themselves to the Canadian Alliance, and then were forced to eventually merge into the modern Conservative Party. So there is just kind of logistical issues in creating a national party, and I think that's a kind of trap that the PPC fell into. They overextended themselves to something that they didn't have the human capital for, and they ended up dropping their standards to build that, to bring people into the organization that might not have been good enough representatives or effective enough volunteers. But if they wanted to have riding associations in every riding, if they wanted to have candidates everywhere, they had to bring down the standards, and as a result, you brought in people that weren't good enough, that turned off people from joining the party, and then as a result, you kind of failed, and now you failed over and over again. They've lost so many elections, so many by-elections, that now they have this kind of perennial kind of stink on them as the losers, and no one really wants to be a part of the losers. Politics is about aesthetics, right? It's about vibes. It's hard to articulate sometimes, but you don't want to be a part of the losers. You want to vote for the winning team, or at least this is how a lot of people think about things. So to get things established, to get things off the ground, to influence things in a more immediate sense, I think the better way to do it is through this kind of metapolitical organization where we look to influence existing parties. But as we do that, and as we engage in the activism that to make that a reality, we will be building a national network of people. We will be identifying high potential volunteers, building a network of experienced individuals, And to become a successful metapolitical organization, we will build the foundation of what could become a political party if need be. And that way we could jump into the political scene in a way that would be, would make a splash and not lead to immediate failures, which could, have a kind of feedback loop and kind of tank the organization. I don't think the PPC can be successful anymore. They failed so much. I don't think that they can turn things around just because they have this vibe on them. So I want to avoid that trap. I think this pathway allows us to be more influential in a more immediate sense, while also setting us up for the long term.
I think the other problem with the electoral politics, at least focusing on that as a smaller group, is that so much of the effort goes into the election cycle, and then once that passes, well, then that energy kind of just dissipates. So the PPC had kind of something going in 2021. They got, was it 5% of the vote or 10%? I think it was 5%, correct? In 2021?
2021, we got 4.9%.
Okay, so almost 5% of the vote, which I mean, it's not totally insignificant, but the problem is that didn't translate to any seats in parliament. And at the same time, that really kind of just dissipated when you came around to this election cycle, when it was a deadlock between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and anyone who voted for the PPC back in 2021, now they voted Conservative because they don't want to see the Liberals get back in, even though that's what ended up happening. The problem with these parliamentary parties is that everything is kind of focused on this election cycle, and a lot of times the energy just kind of dissipates after that. Whereas something metapolitical, it's a lot longer lasting and has the potential to impact politics on a much more fundamental level. So I think that the major failing of the right over the past 80 years has been metapolitical. So there have been plenty of conservative politicians who have gotten into office, but at the same time, during the course of the past, let's say, century, what was the left doing? While the right was just constantly focused on getting elected, the left was taking over media. They were creating movies, TV shows, advertisements. They were taking over the universities, becoming professors, and influencing the corporate world, and then creating all these lobby groups and getting all these client groups. And they've just been working a lot more metapolitically, though. And the end result is that even though they might not have won every single election electorally, their ideas won out. So let's take the idea of what's called today anti-racism, this kind of universalist egalitarianism, which is very much anti-white. I think it's important to make clear. This idea was an idea which was only held by communists a century ago. So largely Jewish, far left activists were the only people who held these positions. So if you look at someone like William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister of Canada in the 1920s, 1930s, even into the 40s, he was a member of the Liberal Party. So he wasn't like far right or anything, but he was pro-white. He explicitly stated that he considered Canada to be a European nation, and he enacted policies designed to maintain the ethnic continuity of Canada. And you fast forward several decades, and now these ideas, which were held by just the far left a century ago, this is now held across the political spectrum. So even supposed right-wingers like the Conservative Party of Canada, the idea of white Canadians being ethnocentric, that's just been so vilified through media, education, that it's just considered beyond the pale for someone like Pierre Poilievre, for instance. And that's all metapolitical. I mean, you can look at how effectively people who were communists a century ago influenced politics, but the Communist Party of Canada never won an election. I don't even know if they ever even got a seat. The Communist Party of the United States never got into power. They got one seat ever?
Yeah, they got one seat. It was a Jewish fellow in a riding in Montreal. And he was actually subsequently deported, I believe, for stealing state secrets and selling it to the Soviets.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the other thing. It's you see that today. I mean, but you look at all these groups today, and they're doing the exact same thing. That's I mean, going back to remigration, that's why we need it. But the issue is like the Communist Party never won an election in, and I don't mean to. I should also clarify. I don't mean to imply that the people we're up against today are communists, because I think it's much more accurate to call them globalists, and their ideology is more this universalist egalitarianism, but it's not Marxist Leninism or anything like that. But the point I want to illustrate is the people who held these ideas a century ago, they didn't win electorally, but when all is said and done, their ideas won, because you see that even the right today holds these ideas, at least the mainstream right.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there. And that's what I was talking about. We need to change the kind of whole framing of things to go back to nationalism and to reject this kind of liberal, universal egalitarianism, however you want to put it. But a lot of people do view things too narrowly. Like they think that things are only solved through political parties. They don't have this kind of grander vision of how to influence society in order to achieve your ideas. So that's I think we're offering something really unique in the Canadian political landscape. There's a litany of these kind of pressure groups, mostly on the left, be it NGOs or charities or community groups or whatnot. But on the right, there's really nothing like us. The only groups kind of at all like this on the right are generally kind of economic and libertarian, which I would argue is not even on the right. But so really, like, we're the only ones addressing kind of culture and nationalism and these things that are very important to people on this kind of gut level. Pocketbook stuff is important for sure, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it motivates people on an emotional level quite like culture, identity, nationalism. So I think it's why we're growing so fast. We have a very unique message that's it's kind of taking off across the world. I think we're at the vanguard of this shifting in the global zeitgeist back towards a more natural order of nationalism. And I think a part of it, like, this is just kind of a result of trends in global power, right? Like, we're seeing the United States decline as the kind of unipolar hegemon, and a shift back to a kind of multipolar world, and adjusting for a more nationalist viewpoint within that kind of power dynamic, global power dynamics. Like, it makes sense. So I think we're kind of at the cutting edge of something. I think we've launched this at the right time. While we don't have much time, if we're going to kind of turn our society around, I think we have the right tactics, the right message, and all at the right time. So I think that's why we're growing so quickly, and we're going to continue to grow so quickly as we get more active. Because, like, as I said, right now we're mostly just active on social media. We're bringing in a lot of people, but it's going to be very different in a few months once we kind of get our volunteers onboarded and start things get boots on the ground and start activating people in the real world, not just in the digital world. Then things are you're going to start to really see our influence, and people are going to see how serious we are about taking our country back.
I think, like, another problem with the Canadian scene is that it's too much. It's too Americanized, so to say, because we don't have the same, like, media apparatus as the United States, which the result is that a lot of Canadian politics, especially the online stuff, has really kind of followed after the US. And what you see with all these so-called right-wing influencers in Canada, a lot of them, they always have this American flag in their bio. They're obsessed with they're obsessed with Donald Trump, and they create the same kind of slop content that you see from someone like the Quartering or Tim Pool. It's basically just like saying, "Oh my God, look what Mark Carney did this week. Oh well, look at Justin Trudeau," and there's no direction in it, but also it's something that's just it's not even Canadian. I mean, going back, I mean, I know that this guy, you and I have both have clashed with him before. You know that Clyde, what's his name, Clyde Do Something guy. You know the one I'm referring to?
Yeah, he does. He has me blocked, but he spent a week kind of seething about me and Dominion Society.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is like going back to this guy. He's basically this slop content creator who churns out outrage bait each day. It's like, oh my god, look what the liberals did today. But I mean, one thing that's funny is that like he's kind of gotten on board with the whole James Lindsay crowd, and that he's calling us woke right. But I mean, going back to what I said earlier, like if you think of this guy's ideas, like he said, he repeated the myth of the idea that the Irish or Italians weren't considered white in the United States, which is incorrect. Again, that's a lie that was created by a Jewish communist that was created by Nolik Nadiev. Or he said something like, well, what is a heritage Canadian? What about the Chinese who built the railroads? Well, then again, there's like people like Howard Zinn, and another Jewish communist. That's where those kind of ideas are from. He said it was authoritarian to think of yourself as an ethnic group or to want remigration. Well, there's the authoritarian personality. That's Theodore Adorno, another Jewish communist. Or he said that he believes in the Canada as the multicultural country. Well, there's Pierre Trudeau. That was Justin Trudeau's father. Now, I don't think that this guy's ever read any of these books because I don't think he's read anything other than headlines and tweets in his life. But the point is that even though this is someone who considers themselves ostensibly on the right, I mean, his entire idea of Canada and of ethnicity and of nation is entirely entirely formed by left-wing metapolitics, and that's why it's such an important avenue to attack politically, because when you just think about the conservatives versus the liberals, well, the problem is that the conservatives, as they exist in Canada, they aren't any better than the liberals because they fundamentally don't have our ethnic interests in mind any more than the liberals do. So I think that's why we really need to have a different approach than just first of all just reacting to the news, to being obsessed with parliamentary politics, but also I think there's the issue of the Canadian scene being too dictated by Americanism, and I think that we also need something that is just uniquely Canadian. And I do like that the Dominion Society is something which is focused primarily on Canada and doesn't really get into the whole like Trumpian, what I call slopulist outrage cycle of social media.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is this growing trend of Americanism, and so many of the big influencer accounts were really brought up during COVID. That's where they really built their following. And during COVID, a kind of libertarian type message was necessary. Obviously, the whole issue was government overreach. But when it comes to actual like conservative kind of Canadian identity politics, like that's not libertarian, that's not liberal in nature. If you actually do the reading, if you actually understand the history, you'll understand this. But we're left with all these kind of COVID holdovers, the pleb, Cat Canada, all these people built their massive followings during COVID, but also they benefit from bigger American audiences. They're like the voice of Canada to Americans, so they're kind of influenced by Americanism that way as well. And they benefit from gaining followers by talking about American issues and American politics.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's not actually what Canada needs. If we're going to get ourselves back on track, we need real Canadian solutions. I've seen a lot of people in the last 24 hours gassing the idea of Turning Point Canada. And I think this is unnecessary. Obviously, I'm biased because I have my own organization. But I think really what we're putting forward is what Canada needs if we're going to get things back on track. We don't need to import another American organization and more American-style politics and American-style liberalism. What we need is something informed by our history and our identity, and much of that is specifically a rejection of American ideas in favor of Canadian ones. So I think that's what we need to organize around, and I think that will take off more in the Canadian mainstream because it's in line with our historic nature as Canadians. Canadians will always be apprehensive of liberalism and Americanism. It's just in our nature.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that this isn't meant to be a dig at Charlie Kirk. Of course, both of us were obviously horrified by his murder and condemn it in the harshest terms. I mean, I've made plenty of posts about that, but there's this idea now that back in 2018 they tried to start a Turning Point Canada, and it never really got anywhere. Now there's like an idea that we need to take it back, that this needs to get off the ground. Now, again, obviously. This isn't a commentary on the tragedy of what happened to Charlie Kirk, but I think there's a problem of the Americanization of the Canadian right, because what you notice with all these influencers and on social media, these Canadian influencers who are trying to ape MAGA, is that it's always entirely just it's just demoralization slop. So their entire message is just Canada's horrible, Canada sucks. Donald Trump is cool, and that's why, even though this is an extremely unpopular idea in Canada, a lot of them are now peddling this idea that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. So there's that. What's that guy's name? That Zachary Tisdale guy, really irritating individual. But so basically, his entire shtick is saying, "Oh my God, look what this Muslim did in Canada. Don't you want us to become part of the United States? Oh my God, look at the WEF. Oh, this guy, Mark Carney is part of the WEF. Don't you want Canada to become part of the US?" And it's a totally counterproductive message, not only because it's extremely unpopular and it's not going to get you anywhere, but it's not something that's going to appeal to the Canadians' nature. So like you mentioned, there is this anti-Americanism in Canada. Now, I think that it's deleterious in some ways, in that it gets people to support leftist politics, in the sense that they see it as pushing back against someone like Donald Trump. But at the same time, I think that the solution isn't to then try to embrace a kind of politics which just doesn't really work in Canada. It's you have to actually harness that instinct and push it into something that's productive. I would say that ultimately the goal needs to be, because this is the other problem with these slopulist influencers on the Canadian right on X, even though they get like all of this they get all this traction on social media and they seem to get promoted by the algorithm, but the problem is that they have no vision. Like they don't. A lot of them don't even know what we mean when we say heritage Canadian. So a lot of them got angry when they call us woke right or something like that. So
they don't know like these people.
They don't know the history. They don't know the history because their entire consciousness has been formed by Americanism.
Yeah, exactly. Like so many of these people, they're the beginning of Canadian history is Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Like they have no vision outside of the post-war liberal world order, and they just want to shift back. We need to return to Harper. That's it. We just need to return to slightly reduced immigration numbers and a slightly better managed government. And like that's not actually true, and it's not historically informed on our history or our identity. And it's why they're just terminally online kind of activists that mostly have an increasingly internationalist and American audience. So it's not, they don't have a cohesive worldview. They don't have a message that will actually take off. They're really just after clicks and stuff. But I you mentioned right off the top that we've kind of seen a growing nationalist movement that's outside of this. It's a very normal Canadian experience that to be successful, you must go to the United States. And for a long time, this was a factor of moving there. We see this even amongst like musicians and actors and all of people like that. But now you see it more with influencers and stuff. There's so many online, Twitter accounts or influencer accounts that are actually Canadian, but they only post international news slop. But over the last few years, we've seen more and more Canadian Canadians actually turn their focus onto Canada and putting out content on our situation and our history and our identity. And now we're the Dominion Society, myself, we're another important puzzle piece to really push this movement to the next level. But we're just one of many Canadians that are now becoming more focused on this. And I think we can go even further if some of these other influencers, they are talented communicators. I think that's one of the archetypes of the Canadian, effective negotiators and communicators, is a crucial part of our identity, and that's why you see all these hermetic messenger types, translating our message into global politics. But we need these guys to turn their eyes back on Canada and help us grow our influence and our message across this country.
Yeah, I mean, even I'm guilty of that to an extent. I mean, I've always been kind of more of a broadly right-wing content creator, and I mean, I'm still going to probably be that. But at the same time, I think that the issue was that there really just wasn't a Canadian scene at all, and I didn't really have anything to comment on because it just seemed like and there wasn't really anything happening, but I do feel like it is now, and I am very encouraged. So, like, one anecdotal thing that I can say is that in the last 2 years, I've been to 2 different conferences in Europe, which were right-wing nationalist conferences, and at both of them, Canadians were greatly overrepresented. There were tons of Canadians at all of them, and I know there was this same thing that CBC reported on a couple of years ago, saying that Canadians were overrepresented in so-called far right, so-called hate speech on the internet. And what that means is that kind of this sphere of politics has always been Canadians have always been overrepresented in it, which might seem counterintuitive when you think of the overall picture of the country today. But like we've gone into, it actually does make sense when considering the underlying psyche of Canada as a country. I think that's what we'll finish up soon. But I think that what the goal ultimately should be is that the goal of an organization like the Dominion Society, and a goal of just like nationalism in general, is I think the goal has to be to make it so that our views are just the norm for people of European descent. So in the context of Canada, that viewing Heritage Canadians as a group and considering our interests as both valid and important, and that our political activities go towards that's ultimately the goal, because from there, then the entire political process will shift away from this kind of liberal, egalitarian, universalist, globalist consensus towards one that actually benefits us. And I think that, I mean, more broadly around the Western world, the goal, I think, of the broader dissident right is, or what I guess what used to be called that, the whole like nationalist right, is to ultimately shift people of European descent mentality away from this kind of universalism and back towards ethnocentrism. I think in the context of Canada, I am very happy with something like the Dominion Society, because I think that the message is solid, the message is on point, and I so far have been really impressed with the organization and the work that you guys have put out so far. And I'm glad to be a part. I'm glad that I've signed up for a membership. I think that from there it's just organizing. So once people have shifted their mindset from the previous liberal universalist mindset, which we've been under for the past several decades, towards ethnocentrism, then the next step is forming organizations, which something like the Dominion Society seems to be. So do you have anything else you'd like to say before we finish, Daniel?
No, just thanks for having me on. If you're interested in anything that we chatted about today, do check us out. Head over to our website, dominionsociety.ca. You can sign up for our email list. You can become a member, make a small donation, or just see more about what we're all about. Check out our full remigration plan there on the What is Remigration page. You can also follow us on social media. You can find us on all the main platforms at Dominion SOC, SOC. And you can follow me on social media as well. And my main platform's Twitter. You can find me. It's my full name, at my full name, Daniel Tyrie. But thanks for having me on. It was a really fun discussion. I think we hit a lot of good points. And we're really proud to have the support of people like you. And we hope we can do you proud as we continue to build out this organization and put forward our message.
Excellent. So the links to the Dominion Society are down below. And if you're Canadian and you're interested in this sphere, I highly recommend that you check them out and consider giving a donation. So this organization has my endorsement. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for listening, and I will see you next time.